Well, welcome back, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Strout, once again. And in this segment, we're going to kind of just quickly go through Holy Week. Many of us haven't experienced, we may experience Palm Sunday, we may experience Easter Sunday, but there's a whole lot of things that happen in between that time, right, Dr. Strout?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And I think one of the things that I would want to say right off the bat before we even start to talk about the individual celebrations is what is the purpose of these celebrations? We talked about that in our last session in terms of the centrality of the Paschal mystery of Christ. But also, what we are doing is we are commemorating a theological event that's happening. So, what we're not doing is we're not trying to recreate an historical event. So, this is not, for example, some people do, recreations of different historical events that happen. And they try to make it as real as possible and make sure they've got, all the right costumes on and all the right things on and everything. That's not what we're doing with the Holy Week services. We're not trying to recreate what happened historically. Rather, we're trying to celebrate what each of these liturgies mean.
Yeah. And so we start off our Holy Week with this, we've been wearing purple most of Lent, and we come in on Palm Sunday and the church is decked out in palms. Clergy are wearing red. There's, red, the altars apparelled in red and all that. And we come in singing this triumphant song, all glory, laud, and honor. And we're asked to swing these palm branches. What's that all about? What are we commemorating there?
Yeah, so there we're commemorating Christ's triumphal entry into Jerusalem when he chooses to go to Jerusalem. And that's so important for us to understand theologically that yes, Christ was executed by imperial authorities, but he made the decision of his own free will to turn toward Jerusalem and to enter into a place that he knew could be very dangerous for him and possibly and did cost him his life. And he was welcomed initially as a king when he entered into that, and that's what we are doing. But this is a service that has a lot of emotion in it and has some pretty big emotional swings that happen pretty fast in it. So we got to kind of keep up with it.
Yeah, and we, of course, for the gospel reading that day, I mean, we're going through the whole passion narrative, from his triumphal entry into Jerusalem to, his death and, his burial.
That's right. Yeah. So we have this big kind of celebratory feel right at the beginning, and then it is not long before we head right into that passion gospel. And it's either Matthew, Mark, or Luke, depending on the year that you're in, but their account of the passion. And I'm imagining that you all at your church do it like many other churches where there are parts that are given and everybody's reading different parts and so forth. And it can I think that's a great way to do it because it can really bring it to life and make it very meaningful for everyone.
Abs Absolutely. Yeah, you have somebody else playing Pilate, you've got someone playing Jesus, the apostles, and the high priest Caiaphas. I think it kind of I think when they were constructing the liturgy and that, it just made it very interesting that you had these intricate parts that could be shared amongst the people. Even if we don't have a designated part, we the people have a part that
Right.
is in that gospel reading.
That's right. And you can really feel it viscerally when you're having to say things like crucify him, for example, and
Right.
the responses that the congregation usually has. And it gives you a sense that you are actually participating in some way in that important event.
So we kind of Palm Sunday jettisons us into this Holy Week, right? And we have the triumphal entry into Jerusalem. We get the account of Christ's triumphal entry into Jerusalem, his to his going before Pilate, into even his death, right? And we mark that sometimes by kneeling. But we go into this, and then for the rest of the week, we've got, Holy Monday, Holy Tuesday, Holy Wednesday. Various churches mark it differently. We're going to do that by having Stations of the Cross, during that time. And then we get to Maundy Thursday.
Yes, yeah.
And why do we call it Maundy Thursday? Why don't we just call it Holy Thursday?
Right. Monday comes from the Latin word mandatum, which is to serve. And that's what Christ is referring to in Maundy Thursday. Let me actually begin by saying that those 3 days, Monday, Thursday, Good Friday, and then the Easter Vigil, are what we call the Triduum. Um,
Mm,
that's just a fancy word for meaning 3 days. But really, it's one service that extends over 3 days. That's the way I'd really like you to think about it, rather than three distinct services. We'll see the Monday, Thursday service doesn't really kind of end. It's more like it continues, and then it goes into Good Friday, and then the same with the Good Friday service doesn't really end. It kind of continues and goes into the Easter Vigil. It's almost like it's one big celebration. And indeed, that's what happened back in the fourth century with Jiria and the other pilgrims.
right.
It was this sense that they were just celebrating all of this from there. But yeah, Monday, Thursday, we get the name from mandatum, which means to serve, and this is a commemoration of Christ's final time with his disciples, when he's in the upper room, and he is speaking to them about his body and blood, what we would call instituting the Eucharist at that time, and giving that as a commandment to us that we are to do this in remembrance of him. And then also in the John account of that story, this is where he gets up and he goes around the table and washes the feet of his disciples. Now, foot washing isn't something we're used to, probably too much here in the United States. But in the Middle East at that time, it was quite common to do it because, of course, it was very dusty and hot, and people wore sandals a lot. And so you come in to someone's home and someone would wash your feet, but it would usually be the servant, one of the servants who would wash your feet. And what Christ is doing here by being the one to go around and wash the feet is to model for his disciples and for us today what it means to be a leader, what it means to be the rabbi, to be the teacher. And what that means is to first and foremost be a servant.
Yeah, because we get in that gospel count like right before, we do this act of foot washing, right? Christ tells us that, we should love one another, right? And that we should wash each other's feet, like he says, I wash your feet, so you therefore should go and wash other people's feet. And washing people's feet, a lot of people get, there's some Episcopal churches that don't do it, and because people feel like it's weird, it may be too intimate. But why would you tell a church that does this practice, or maybe doesn't do this practice, but why would you commend this practice of washing feet besides of just what it tells us in scripture?
Yeah, yeah. So again, this is not trying to recreate the Last Supper. We're not trying to pretend that we are Jesus and pretend that we are 12 disciples or anything like that. So I'm not sure how things are done at your church, but I know, for example, there are some churches where, the priest is the only one who washes feet and brings up only 12 people. And I don't know. And if this is what you do at your church, my apologies, but that kind of model makes me a little nervous because it feels a little too much like we're trying to recreate the Last Supper. I think a model that is really understanding the spirituality of foot washing is when every person goes up and they have their feet washed, and then they get up and wash the person who comes next to them, because that's actually what Christ says. Do this. Just as I have done this to you, do this to others. And we all share in this foot washing experience. St. Ambrose, actually, St. Ambrose of Milan, who was the bishop for the great St. Augustine, he believed that foot washing had a sacramental character to it.
Yeah.
Now, this is years and years, centuries before we talk anything about seven sacraments or anything like that. So, but he thought that foot washing had a sacramental character to it. And I think there's really something to that, that we are experiencing the Spirit of Christ when we are willing to do this humble act, but also willing to receive it.
Right. Right.
In
Absolutely.
some ways, that's the harder thing. I think
Yes.
people would probably be less worried about having washing someone else's feet, but having my feet washed. That can be harder, but that's just as important. It's just important for us to receive that loving care as much as it is to give it.
I experienced my first so as a Roman Catholic, I did the washing of the feet, but I didn't do it, right? I experienced it, and it was always the priest or the bishop that would wash the 12. They got 12 representatives, right? But it was my first time of going to the National Cathedral, and they have it where the whole congregation goes and washes feet. And it was so powerful for me. I didn't realize I thought it was just an action we did, but spiritually for me, I mean, I totally align with what St. Ambrose said. I mean, it was just spiritually powerful. And I just remember going back to I mean, it almost seemed like I received Holy Communion in a sense, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And for a lot of us down here in the South that a long time ago, and it's still a practice in some of them, we have foot washing Baptists down here,
Oh,
um,
yeah.
who kind of, I guess, take on, even though they may not be aware of Ambrose, but it's kind of viewed as a sacramental thing. Sometimes foot washing is done more often than the celebration of the Lord's Supper in some of these Baptist churches.
Wow.
So, kind of a Southern Gothic thing.
Interesting.
I never came across it until I started reading a lot of Southern literature, but I know I've got some kinfolk up in like North Louisiana and North Mississippi where it's still a common practice up there.
Yeah.
So, but anyways, so we go from okay, we do the foot washing, we do it because Christ tells us to, and then we get into the institution of the Lord's Supper. We celebrate Holy Eucharist, together, and then the service takes another dramatic turn. We then go into this thing where we strip the altar, and we take all the beautiful things that are normally adorning our church, and we either veil them or strip them away. Why do we do that? And why do we do the things that we do to the altar?
Yes, right. Yeah. Again, I think this is something we want to make sure that we understand more as a commemoration theologically, and not try to put too much literalness to it. But it is this sense that the altar is a place in which we experience Christ. And so we normally decorate it. We put flowers on it. We make it look nice because it's important. It's a sign of the honor and respect that we offer to it. But in this particular commemoration, when we are stripping it, it's that sense of Christ be, being brought into the garden, being prepared for his passion that will happen, that we will commemorate on Good Friday. And the fact that, he was stripped of his clothes, he was flogged, he was beaten, he was humiliated. And by removing all of the grandeur and all of the beauty, it kind of brings a starkness, a bareness to what's going to happen. And it's really quite striking.
Yeah.
You haven't ever experienced that. It really is, if your church is one in which you normally have beautiful adornments, to suddenly have all of that taken away, it really is a visual change, and it kind of almost hits you in a bodily way.
And you get this kind of this starkness of it. And in
Yeah.
some churches, I'm not, I actually don't know if what my parish does, But what St. Paul's does, but there's some parishes where they'll wash the altar very
Yeah.
gingerly. What is the symbology of just that washing of the altar?
That is, for some churches again will understand the altar as being kind of a place that represents the sacrifice of Christ. And so washing it is almost as if they're preparing his body for
Mm,
is kind of the
yeah.
symbolism that's involved there. Yeah.
All the churches that I've been to have washed it. I know that not all parishes do that, that it's not a requirement or anything like that. But it's been my experience too that also can be very powerful as well. But wanting to stay away from, okay, trying to over literalize it, right? Okay, and then for the service, then we go and there's a place where we can pray. The sacrament is reserved for us to be able to pray. Sometimes it's adorned, sometimes it's just in a simple chapel. And we keep watch with the Lord. And is that to hearken us back to keeping watch like the disciples were, or why do we participate in this activity per se, this liturgical activity?
Yeah. So in the accounts then of Christ's time in the Garden of Gethsemane, he asks the disciples to stay awake and to pray with him. And he goes off to pray on his own. And of course, he comes back and they've fallen asleep, and he kind of chides them a bit. And then he goes off to pray again and experiences that great passion of, Father, please take this cup away from me, that we hear about. And that's kind of what's going on in this symbolism of that Christ is present in the sacrament. He's sacramentally present with us through the reserved sacrament. And like you said, sometimes some parishes will put it in a place and they might put like greenery or to give it kind of a garden type feel for that. And then some parishes will have an all-night vigil where
Yeah.
people sign up to be present and to pray and to, in that sense of staying up with Christ and being present with Christ as he asked his disciples to do.
So, like you had said, so we participate that the liturgy doesn't end. We don't have a dismissal in this liturgy because it's all one liturgy. And
Mhm.
then, so we have the night vigil, and then we move into Good Friday, and that liturgy, it happens at different points, but also a very powerful liturgy in which we experience a lot. Sometimes the Passion is reread again, but we have this practice of in some churches, the veneration of the cross, right?
Right.
Why do we do this veneration of a cross, of a wooden cross?
Yeah, and that is one that is a piece of that practice that we see recorded in Egeria's diary as well as mentioned by other people. In fact, we even have some recordings that people would go and venerate what they believe to be the true cross and take a bite out of it so that they can bring a little bit of the true cross home with them. So, I don't suggest you do that. But it is that sense of the cross is a powerful, powerful symbol in Christianity. It is our primary symbol in Christianity. And of course, it symbolizes the sacrifice that Christ made for us and for all of humanity, really for all of creation.
Right.
And so, in this particular way, is a way in which we honor and give respect to this symbol and to what it symbolizes, this action, this event that Christ participated in, and that we, like we were talking about earlier, participate in as well. And again, it's very, very powerful. If you haven't experienced that, and if you haven't had the opportunity to venerate the cross, it is a powerful experience. It is important for us to be clear that we are not worshiping the cross. The cross is not an object of worship for us. It is a symbol. It points to Christ, and Christ points to God the Father. So it's not that we are worshiping it, but rather that we are paying it respect and honor as a symbol of what Christ has done for us.
Yeah, and very powerful again to be able to go up and maybe kiss the cross, or you can, just bow at the cross. Whatever you do, it's very powerful.
Yeah.
But then we move into having Holy Communion, but it's not a full Eucharistic service like we're used to, right? There's a simple prayer, and there's a distribution, right? It's not a normal Eucharistic service, a mass per se, right?
That's
It's
right.
it, we're just going from the reserved sacrament at that point. And so why do we not celebrate, Holy Eucharist on that day? I mean, we have distribution of communion, but we're not having a full Eucharistic service, right?
Right. The idea behind that is that the Eucharist that happened on the night before Monday, Thursday, is the final Eucharist before we celebrate the Eucharist of Easter. That will be a new Eucharist. And so what we do is we consecrate enough of the sacrament at the Monday, Thursday service that will last not only for that service, but also for the Good Friday service, in that sense that Friday is a day of sorrow and somberness, and that and the Eucharist by its nature is celebratory, uh,
Yeah.
and it's a celebration. It is our offering of praise and thanksgiving to God. And this is the one day in which we don't do it. And I don't know. Also, I'll ask you a question. Does your church typically reserve the sacrament and have either an ombre or a tabernacle with a candle that you
We
light?
we do. We have a tabernacle behind the altar that's on a retowel that and the sanctuary candle hangs off to the side, but clearly visible from when you come into the church. And of course, that's absent, and usually the tabernacle, as I've seen in places, is just left open, right? Because
That's
it's
left open, right?
yeah.
Yeah. So this is the one day of the year when the sanctuary candle is not lit, and is not there. And because it is just this one day, it's really jarring for us if we're used to seeing that, and if we're used to maybe, bowing or genuflecting or anything like that. We wouldn't do that on this
Right.
day because the sacrament is not present. Because once we've received from the reserved sacrament, the idea is to consume it all, so that there is none left whatsoever. And it's symbolizing that Christ has left in some way. Now, of course, we know in reality Christ is always present with us,
Absolutely.
but again, it's a symbol that there was this time between his death and his resurrection that he was not present with us in the same way, and that's kind of what we're symbolizing.
And then we kind of have this dramatic setting of Good Friday, and then in some parishes, like what we're planning on doing here at St. Paul's, is that there's a Holy Saturday morning service that can be done. Very simple, very. It's somewhat brief, as I recall, but a Holy Saturday service, but still very poignant, very beautiful. A lot of important language. What is the importance of this service, the small service that we do before later on in the evening when we would do the vigil?
Yes, this service, it is. It's a brief service, but like you said, it is powerful. And it's speaking to Christ's time in the tomb. And there is scripture that suggests to us that Christ may have descended into hell to lead captivity captive, and to break people free. I won't go into all of that because that's a whole big theology that's involved in that. But this sense that Christ was doing his work to defeat death, which would ultimately happen with the resurrection. But it's a very quiet and simple service that is really commemorating his time in the tomb.
And so after that, the church gets all decked out and decorated, and then we're invited again to come back to church, and then we start off with the church darkened, and then we have this candle, and we got this fire outside, and the priest says some prayers over them. and this kind of what marks the Easter Vigil. What's important about the Easter Vigil? Why is it an important service? Why should we bother bringing the family to an Easter Vigil service? For us, it's going to be at 7:30 in the evening, before Easter Sunday. Why even bother with it?
Yes, yeah. Well, again, it's that sense of the 3 days being all of one service because we've ended Good Friday in darkness, in silence. Usually that service always ends with just a silent procession out. And it's a sense of solemnity involved in that. And then the Easter Vigil service also begins usually in darkness. Sometimes some people will do it outside or they'll do it at the back of the church. But usually, if it's being done in the church, the lights are often dimmed or darkened completely. And then you see this fire that appears. And this is again that sense of Christ's time in the tomb and then this resurrection happening. But of course, no one actually witnessed the resurrection itself. Like no one was right there to witness it. We have witnesses after the fact that come to the tomb and it's empty, or then see Christ when he has already been resurrected. But nobody's seen it right there. But that sense of this light returning back to the darkness. And then, excuse me, then the candle that we light is an important candle. We call it the Paschal candle, just like we were talking about Paschal mystery of Christ. We call this the Paschal candle. And this is a new light that we use. And just a little test for you here, Austin, see how much you do remember. What are the other two times that we use the Paschal candle besides the Easter time?
Yeah, so we'll definitely utilize it on I believe it's All Saints Day, right? It comes out for All Saints Day. It comes out whenever we have baptisms, especially when we have those. But I know that it's Easter, of course, we have it for Easter. We have it for, I don't know, I don't think it's out for I'm trying to think here. I only know the Easter and for All Saints.
For baptisms, but then it's for another type of not what happens at the end. If you think of bookmarks, we have baptism at the beginning, and then what would be the type of service we would have at the end of someone's life?
Funerals,
You know,
funerals. That's right. That's
yeah.
right.
Yeah. And so that symbol then of Christ's resurrection, the Paschal candle, that we have it at baptism, which is when we celebrate our new birth in Christ, and then we have it at the funeral when we celebrate our new birth in Christ in terms of someone's passing from this life to the next life. And yes, we bring that into the service, singing what the Exultet, which is a centuries old hymn, very
Say it
old.
goes back to the 8th century, right? Yeah.
Yes, yeah, very old hymn, and we sing that and bring the Paschal candle up to the front, and then we hear about the saving deeds of God,
Yeah.
Hebrew scriptures, and then moving into the New Testament as well.
It's interesting because like you get this idea in the Exodus talking about this pillar of fire leading the people through the water of Israel, right? And in some churches, they take the Paschal candle and will put it into the baptismal font when it comes time for baptisms or renewal of baptismal vows. And why do we do that on this liturgy of all liturgies? After we've done the things, after the lights have come back on and the glories of Easter, the bells and all this, or some churches do it before, that all comes about. But why do we renew our baptismal vows on the Easter Vigil?
Because that was the time when baptisms would occur and was leading up to it. And Lent was actually a season. Initially, it was a season of preparation for baptism. It was also a season of reconciliation for people who had fallen away from the church and wanted to return. But it was the season in which people were being prepared for baptism. And the Easter Vigil was seen as a particularly special day. Well, not the only day that one would get baptized, but a particularly special day because it is this symbolism of Christ's death and resurrection, which is what baptism is about.
Yeah, and for a lot of people that may have grown up in the Catholic Church, and especially after the Second Vatican Council, when Easter vigils become a thing, and you hear this phrase of the catechumenate, we have that as well in the Episcopal Church. But when catechumens are welcomed to the church fully, like you're baptized, you could be confirmed at that point, and then you receive Holy Communion for the first time. You join the whole body of the church, right?
That's right. Yeah. And and I think that there's something to be said, especially in our modern day times where it's so easy for us to get what we want. I
Right.
mean, we can order something on Amazon and sometimes even have it delivered the very same day. But there is something about this season of preparation and this season of waiting.
Yeah.
And that's what the catechumens had to do. They had to wait. They had a whole season in which they were preparing and praying and studying and so forth. But it was really the sense of waiting, and it is in waiting that desire grows in us. That
Yeah.
we want something even more when we have to wait for it. And so then when they had this amazing liturgy where on the Easter Vigil, and this was indeed the first time for them to be able to receive communion, it was very powerful for
Yeah.
them.
And I mean, and I mean, you can watch like Washington National Cathedral and some of these other churches that do really well Easter vigils. I mean, there's a lot of preparation that goes into this, not just for Easter Sunday. I mean, a lot of work goes into the liturgies of the week. We have to really be grateful for our altar guild because they do a whole lot to be able to help prepare for that. But that Easter vigil is really that mark, and I've heard it said that all of our liturgies spring from this one liturgy, the Easter Vigil. It is the nexus of our faith. It's the core of that Paschal mystery that you were talking about, right?
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. It is the heart of it.
Yeah.
Um, and yes, that's right. And then everything else kind of, like you said, springs from this. The rest of the liturgical year as well, each Sunday is kind of then a commemoration, a little Easter, like we were
A
saying.
little Easter, yeah. And we have it, yeah, as Dr. Farwell would say, our whole prayer book is really kind of geared around this whole idea of the Paschal mystery, not just the Easter Vigil, right? The liturgy of all liturgies, but it springs out of this whole idea of, we're supposed to be a people that continuously imbibes the Paschal mystery and lives it out on a daily occasion.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course we can do that without necessarily attending the services themselves. But when we do attend them and we do participate in them to the best of our ability, it just takes on a life of its own that is really very, very powerful. And it's, so yeah, I strongly encourage all of you to really think about just making that commitment to attend these services if you're able, because they're very, very powerful.
You beat me to my last question. I was going to ask you once again. I was like, why should we go to these services? Because at that point in time, it's busy. With school coming to an end, we have crawfish boils down here. And we have three Easter parades. Dr. Strout, we have three Easter parades that roll on Easter Sunday. So
Well,
I mean, a lot, right?
I shouldn't be
Um,
surprised. New Orleans doesn't know how to celebrate.
We do, we do. Well, I just wanted to tell you, thank you so much for giving us kind of an overview of these important liturgies that are important to our Christian life as Episcopalians, but as small C Catholic Christians, right? Because Orthodox celebrate this in a specific way. They celebrate the Easter Vigil. Our Roman Catholic brothers and sisters do. Our Lutheran brothers and sisters down the street, and also our Methodists. So it really does become kind of like this whole universal thing.
Yes, definitely. Yep, yep.
Oh, powerful, powerful. Well, once again, thank you so much, Dr. Shaw. I
Very
know
welcome.
that the people of good people of St. Paul's, thanks you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure, always.
Well, thank you so much, and God bless.